climate business. So today's event is organized by 3 climate business networks, actually 4. From Nordic countries, so Haga Initiative Sweden, Climate Leadership Coalition Finland, Skift Norway, and CER Sustainable Business Network Slovenia. We actually, all the groups participate in Sustainable Business Network Europe, which works under the Cambridge Institute Sustainability Leadership under University of Cambridge, and we have monthly meetings. We discuss very interesting topics, and already in the spring we decided to have in autumn the event on the topic of the carbon pricing and different climate actions to stop climate change. Actually, today we would like to have a very open event, so all the questions from the public are welcome. We have the speakers from Sweden, Norway, and Finland who would like to present best practice and their experiences in the field of climate action, climate carbon pricing methods and mechanisms. So really thank you, Nina Ekelund from Haga Initiative. We already worked on several events together, and this is the event that it's a hot topic. That's why we really wanted to share experiences, open best practice, and actually find new solutions for all the countries to accelerate climate action, which must double or even triple that we achieve the goals, and that would be for benefit of all of us. So thank you all the participants to be with us, and thank you all the guests to be the speakers today on our event. But before we go to the program, Nina and the team from Sweden prepared a short Mentimeter for all the participants, which I kindly ask you now to share the link and make some put some questions to the audience.
And Anna, thank you.
Yes.
And I would love you to take up your phone or your computer, and you will see the Menti. So you go to www.menti.com, and after you have gone to that web page, you're writing the code 81038155. And there you see a word cloud, and then you write in, what is your first thought on carbon pricing? So menti.com and the code. Okay, someone got it from the first, obvious. And the code 81038155. Necessary, needed. Difficult. And it's urgent as well, and complex. Taxes. And it's a tax. Needed. I have got 7 people to write in here. Crucial. Great. Signal. Economically feasible. Excellent tool. Really great, and you can still keep fill in the word, and must.
Okay. So
yes, and you can continue to fill in, and it's because we will collect this as good input and also use it in social media. So please fill in it. And I hand over to you, Anna. We got really some good response here, Anna.
Thank you to the participants to give us your feedback and your opinions. So we continue with our first speaker from the European Commission, Ms. Polona Gregorin, Deputy Head of Unit on EU ETS policy development and auctioning. So Ms. Polona, kindly welcome and thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Good morning. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to the discussion and for organizing the discussion and thus helping to create the momentum on carbon pricing on our journey to net zero. Let me try to share my screen to show you a few slides that I have prepared. I'll try to see if I can get rid of this. Okay, I think this should work more or less. Okay, so I believe I can say that the EU has demonstrated that carbon pricing does work. Our carbon pricing tool at the EU level is EU emissions trading system. And we have seen emission reductions in the sectors covered since 2005 of 43%. So over the 16 years, we have seen emissions going down in the sectors covered by more than 40%, which is far from a negligible amount of emission reductions. But let me start by explaining a bit how the EU emission trading system works. It works based on a principle of a cap and trade system. And the concept of a cap and trade is the following. We set a cap on overall emissions that the, let's say, participants and the sectors in the system covered can emit. And then those participants are then free to trade in emission allowances. They can either receive or buy emission allowances on the market. And at the end of the year, they need to surrender the amount of emission allowances for each ton of emissions that they emitted. So if in a year they have reduced emissions, they have, let's say, extra emission allowances that they can then sell to other participants in the market. And vice versa. If, let's say, they need more emission allowances because they had, let's say, higher emissions, they can buy them from other participants or on the market through auctions. And this sort of creates a market that also provides a carbon price signal that is important to create the price signal to invest in emission reductions. So the EU emission trading system has been in place since 2005, so 16 years of experience so far. It is an essential part of EU climate policy toolbox to price pollution, and as I mentioned before, to harness market forces to deliver emission reductions rather than just, telling where emission reductions should take place. And the carbon price incentive today is around 58 euro per ton of CO2 emitted. As I mentioned, it sets a total cap on the emissions from the sectors covered. And in the EU ETS, that means around 10,000 installations from the sectors such as power, steel, cement, so large industry, chemicals, paper and pulp installations, refineries, as well as aviation within the EU or European Economic Area. It covers 30 countries, so all 27 EU member states, but also so-called EA/EFTA states, which includes Norway, as well as Iceland and Liechtenstein. And overall, it covers around 40% of the EU's total greenhouse gas emissions. Now, by the fact that the EU ETS or carbon pricing sets a carbon price in the market, thereby it also raises substantial revenue that can be used to reinvest in the economy and towards emission reductions. So EU ETS specifically has raised important revenue for member states from the auctioning of allowances, almost 70 billion in the previous phase of the EU ETS, which ran from 2013 and 2020. And in this year alone, in the first half, it raised almost 14 billion euro of revenue for member states. In the EU ETS, we also have some certain provisions or instruments that sort of address distributional issues across member states, because we have member states with different, let's say, investment capacity. So there is a certain amount of redistribution of revenues from the EU ETS from richer to poorer member states. And member states are currently using more than 70% of the revenue that they receive from the emission trading system to tackle climate change, and they report on this every year to the Commission. Now, in addition to the revenue that goes to member states, certain part of revenue is also used to set up two EU-level funds. One is the Innovation Fund, and that is a fund to support innovation in low-carbon technologies in the sectors covered, so in the power sector and in the industry sectors. And we also have a modernization fund, which is another sort of tool to address distributional concerns across member states. And it provides funding for low-income member states to support energy efficiency and modernization of their energy systems. And in addition to, let's say, the auctioning of allowances, which is the predominant way of how emission allowances are allocated or come to the market, a certain amount of allowances are given directly for free to installations cover. That is for industries that are exposed to so-called risk of carbon leakage. And that is the risk that industries could relocate to other countries that don't have, let's say, carbon pricing or other climate action measures in place. And of course, that is not desirable, because it would just sort of relocate emissions that would otherwise happen in the EU in other countries, and thereby sort of undermine the whole aim of the EU action. So turning to, let's say, the point or the main question of today's discussion, how can the EU carbon pricing contribute to investment, green investment, and profitability? It's important to look, how the EU ETS or carbon pricing works from a company perspective. For a company that is covered by an emission trading system, the main issue is how to optimize basically the choice between the current and expected future carbon cost on the one hand, and on the other hand, their possibility to reduce emissions or cost of investing in technologies that would reduce emissions. So basically, companies can choose how much they produce, at which plants, with which fuels, taking into account the carbon price, to optimize this basically business decision. And in the medium term, there will be also an issue whether to invest in efficiency or switch to new, cleaner energy sources. If I give you an example of the power sector, which is one of the biggest sectors covered by the EU ETS, we have seen, especially in the last couple of years, when the carbon price has become sort of more robust, that it has contributed to sort of the switching from coal to natural gas when it comes to electricity production, and thereby substantial reductions, especially in the power sector, in emissions. So this is how a robust carbon price improves profit margins for clean production and technologies, and ultimately promotes investment in innovative low carbon technologies. So I've already told you a bit sort of how the EU ETS has performed so far. But as you may know, the EU has set itself a new, more ambitious emission reduction target for 2030. That is a target of at least 55% emission reductions compared to 1990. And for this increased ambition, of course, we also need to correspondingly strengthen our instruments in place, including the EU ETS. So in July, the European Commission has proposed a revision of the EU ETS, on one hand, sort of strengthening it, but also expanding the emission trading system. So as I mentioned first, we are proposing to strengthen the existing ETS as an investment driver. So this is the ETS that covers the power, heat, industry, and aviation. We also have proposed sort of strengthening of the market stability reserve. That is an instrument that ensures the stability of the carbon market by sort of responding to any demand shocks, such as the one that we've seen, of course, with the impact of the pandemic. The proposal also provides for improved protection against the risk of carbon leakage by more targeted free allocation, but also sort of adapting the free allocation to another separate proposal, which is the proposal that we also see already mentioned earlier, the CBAM, so the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. It also provides for improved revenue use, including to increase the sizes of the funds that I mentioned, so the innovation and modernization funds, to help companies meet the investment challenges. So this is, let's say, when it comes to the existing ETS, but importantly, we also propose to extend emission trading systems, or the carbon price at the EU level, to new sectors, notably the sectors of buildings and road transport. And we also propose to include maritime transport into the existing ETS. And for maritime transport, some of you will know, we already have in place monitoring, reporting, and verification of emissions from the maritime sector. And now we also sort of propose to include part of the maritime sector into the EU ETS. So I'll stop here, but of course, I'm very happy to take any questions and to hear the discussion that follows. Thank you very much.
Ilona, thank you very much for this broad overview of ETS on EU and also the proposals that are coming. One short question from my side would be, what countries from your point of view have the most effective carbon pricing mechanism in Europe, or also out of Europe?
Well, indeed, at the EU level, as I mentioned, we have, of course, the EU ETS, and I think it's safe to say that it has sort of proven that it has worked. Like I said, it has contributed to, or it has achieved 43% emission reductions compared to 2005. Indeed, we also have, in addition to the EU ETS, let's say, in the sectors covered so far, we also have certain sort of national carbon pricing mechanisms, such as notably carbon taxes, but also, which I'm sure that the speakers to follow will tell us more about. And we also have, of course, in Germany, an emission trading system emerging for the sectors of building and road transport. So those are the same sectors that we are now also sort of proposing to cover at the EU level. And of course, Germany is one of the countries that is the biggest supporter of this proposal. It's difficult for me to judge which carbon pricing mechanisms are most effective. I think it's safe to say that it's always the most important step almost is to have a carbon pricing in place. We also know that it can be sometimes politically challenging. So also the way that the EU ETS has been devised has been in steps, starting, one could say, with baby steps, but it's important to start somewhere, even if it's small, and then strengthen the carbon pricing over time. So I would maybe stop short of giving a judgment of what is the best carbon pricing in place. Important that the important element that there is carbon pricing in place, and also outside the EU, we've seen notably in the last years, of course, the Chinese carbon pricing popping up. And I think the EU, both at the national level as well as the EU level, has contributed by sort of leading by example showing that the carbon pricing can and does work.
Thank you, Polona, for your contribution to the event. Thank you. Mr. Groschel, you're our next speaker. So Mr. Groschel is Slovenian member of the parliament from Renew and Europe and LMŠ Slovenia. So Mr. Groschel, we would ask you to present the carbon pricing and your point of view.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for having me and inviting me to this event. So now from more technical point of view, now we are going to more political discussion because the European Parliament is known for its political discussion. So the carbon border adjustment mechanism is one of the most hotly debated topics in the European Parliament, especially in our ITRE committee. As you know, we have this failed story with we were writing opinion on the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which failed, and this shows how difficult it will be to put this whole concept through the process of legislative process in the European Union. So the idea of carbon border adjustment mechanism was to provide an equal level playing field between the producers in the European Union and those producers outside the borders of the European Union on one side. And on the other side, the idea is to somehow encourage all those businesses, companies, and producers which are exporting to the European Union market to apply or even to help or to those countries to establish their own ETS system, because the carbon adjustment mechanism is a sort of mirror to the ETS system. As you know, as was presented by previous speaker, the ETS will have now a wider coverage, so it's going into new sectors like transportation, maritime, and so on. And on the other side, the problem with this was that we don't have a system which would make possible for European producers to have the same conditions, to same level playing field as the producers outside the European Union. For example, in the steel and iron industry, you can have a producer, for example, from Turkey or some other country, for which the share of European market presents to his income only 5%. So if there is an ETS system which is working in European Union and there is no ETS system in the country of origin of this producer, he can compensate in different way this additional burden which is established by the ETS. And the carbon border adjustment mechanism, the idea was to include the importers of goods for the time being only in the cement field, iron and steel, aluminum, fertilizers, and electricity, to have the same level playing field for them, so that the costs and the burden of this carbon pricing is shared between EU-based and non-EU-based producers. Especially for the electricity, our idea here is that since this is the majority of countries which are our neighboring countries, especially the Western Balkans and also the Eastern neighborhood, that those systems which these electricity producers which are already part of the wider EU electricity network, to encourage them to establish ETS system or become part of the European EU-based ETS system, or otherwise we will apply to them this carbon adjustment mechanism. So the first and the most hotly debated topic was, of course, the free allowances. As you know, the idea of the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is, by the way, also WTO compatible. This is something which we will see in the future, in the next few years, because the time of setting up of the carbon adjustment mechanism is in 2023 until 2026 as a transition period. And we can expect that there will be some challenges against this mechanism in the World Trade Organization, because some countries are claiming that this is measure of protectionism. The next issue, which was also very, which we still hotly discussed, is the question: is this additional administrative burden to the companies? Because as if you had looked into the system how it works, it will need some quite a lot of administrative work, and especially the question which is now mostly raised by companies is how we will ensure that there will not be discrepancies between the importers and the EU-based producers. It is based on the ETS system, but there could be some questions how this will be done at the end, because some countries, this must be said, are very keen supporter, and this was already mentioned, Germany one of them, and with the new coalition, it is a question if there will be some changes to the ETS system, and the carbon adjustment mechanism as such will have some issues with the certain member states. The carbon border adjustment mechanism, as I said, should play several roles. One, which is very close to the Council of the European Union, is that this should be an EU-owned resource. You know, they can see this as a tax, as an income for the repayment of these loans which were taken in the frame of the of RFF, so this Recovery and Resilience Fund. So this is one of the stories, and this is seen by the member states as an elegant way not to increase the participation of the national budgets in the European budget. So this is one of the risks we are having, because there is a lot of support for this carbon adjustment mechanism, but that there is also the risk that there will not be taken into account all the aspects which this carbon adjustment mechanism is bringing to us. Then the next position is that this established equal level playing field to those EU and non-EU producers. It should prevent the carbon leakage. So there is the question we have in the parliament is how will this reduction by the time of the free allowances impacted the carbon adjustment mechanism, and how will this be compensated, and this will not cause additional problems for the companies, because we can see it now with this energy crisis. We can see that this could be quite a challenging thing for many companies in the European Union. And the last is, of course, incentive to invest more into green technologies. So what we are having the doubts in the European Parliament, especially in part of our ITRE committee, is how can European Union alone push non-EU producers and non-EU countries to install something like ETS system or something to invest into green technologies. Because I think that despite the carbon border adjustment mechanism, and this is one of his aims, I'm still worried that countries could be capable of doing certain politics, especially subsidizing export. This is a problem with China and certain other countries, where these subsidies could outperform the carbon adjustment mechanism. This means that in spite paying this carbon adjustment mechanism fees, taxes, however we call it, there could be state subsidies which could help companies still to produce carbon-intensive products and export them to the European Union. And this is something which carbon adjustment mechanism is not solving at the moment. Okay, on the other hand, to a certain point, it does provide a certain insurance for the EU-based producers. Just for the last few things, that, as you know, this is now limited to certain sectors, which are have a high risk of carbon leakage and high carbon emissions. What I need to stress is also that in the frame of the updated industrial strategy of the European Union, which is now forthcoming in the next few months, there is also taken some consideration of the fact that these sectors, which are already included in carbon border adjustment mechanism, need a special attention. So for example, for the iron and steel, there is envisaged a special program to support the so-called transition to the green steel. I think that circumstances, and also the Commission already put some leverage on it, so some free space for action, that after 2006, before 2006, the carbon adjustment mechanism will be revised. And I think that the same mechanisms and same system of support will be needed for not only for iron and steel, but also, as it's now evident, for aluminium, probably also to a certain extent for the cement production. We will see what happened with the fertilizers, because fertilizers are part of wider policy in the frame of common agricultural policies. But nevertheless, I think that we will have this transition period, and what will be set with this new regulation and this new legislation, I think it will not be written in stone, and it will see some adjustments up to 2026 when this transition period ends. What I could say is that the discussions, as I said, were quite hot. Companies are very hardly lobbying for ETS and free allowances, as you can imagine. But as you must understand, without lowering the scope of the free allowances, the carbon border adjustment mechanism will not work. I will stop at this point, and if you have any questions, I will be more than willing to answer to them.
Mr. Groschel, thank you for stressing out all these issues and also the questions that companies are addressing you. My question would be that EU has still a lot of subsidies on fossil fuels, and so the companies are counting on that. What's your opinion on that, how to reduce those subsidies?
Yeah, this is the next very difficult question for us politicians in the European Parliament, because some of these subsidies are based on I would say, also the social aspects of the, especially in the energy field, which are subsidized because of the social dimension, which is caused by the energy and especially the energy poverty. Others are because of the plain subsidies. I think that the policy of the European Commission and also the prevailing position in the European Parliament is that slowly and steadily we will need to phase out these fossil subsidies. So if there is companies which are counting on these fossil subsidies, I would say it's time to start looking for other alternatives and options, because in the next frame, I would say the time frame of up to 2030, more or less a lot of those subsidies will be abolished. In Slovenian case, if I have to be a little bit more precise, the question is especially in energy production, also in the aluminium production. As you know, there are quite a lot of subsidies in this field. I think that in the case of energy production with coal-fired power plants, we will need to have a very deep discussion, an open and frank discussion on the whole energy concept of the Slovenia. But I think that's establishing a new subsidies for example, for TESH, this is not the solution. Unfortunately, I think we will need to have this open and frank and also hard discussion, and then some very painful decision to take. On the thallium and on the aluminium production, I think that there will be some resolutions in the frame of the updated industrial strategy of the European Union. But nevertheless, we need to think about what can be done in research and development field and also in the field of technological support to reduce, for the companies, to reduce the need for these subsidies.
Great. Thank you very much for sharing the opinion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is a former Minister of Finance in Sweden and former advisor to President Barroso about climate policy. Mr. Alan Larsson, kindly welcome to present how Sweden introduced and implemented carbon pricing and why it is profitable.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Great pleasure to be with you and to be part of this extremely interesting discussion. I will talk about Sweden's big tax reform in the early 1990s. Thus, I will bring you 30 years back, but I promise I will bring you back to present times at the end of my presentation. So let's see. Yes, here is the three messages that I will bring on Sweden's CO tax. The first will be about the politics of Sweden's CO2 tax. The second one about the economic impact of the tax. And the third one is about the EU Green Deal, ETS and CO taxation. How do they fit together if they do? So these are the three main messages. Let's go to the next picture, please. So, and this is about the politics of Sweden's CO2 taxation. So the introduction of CO2 tax was part of a big tax reform in the early 90s. And the aim was to reduce taxes on labor and income and increase taxes on consumption, VAT, capital, and CO2 emissions. Sweden was one of the first countries. It was a group of Nordic countries, and I think that Finland was even a little bit before us in implementing it. But the Nordic countries as a group were front runners in this. So the tax reform was based on an agreement between the Social Democratic-led government and the Liberal Party. And these parties' government at that time represented more than 60% of votes in the parliament. There was an effort to get other parties on board, but this was at the end, those two parties that had the strength to stand up for this tax reform. Initially, the tax was very low, 24 euro per CO2 emitted, per ton CO2 emitted. Over time, it has been increased to 114 euros, thus almost 5 times as much as the original level. And the tax covers almost all five fields outside the European trading system. I think that we cover 95% of all possible pricing fields. And it generates considerable revenues for the general budget. It's now about 2% of total revenues. It had once more from the beginning, but as we have now got the ETS, the area for taxation has been limited. But 2% is a considerable level of revenues. So initially, there was some opposition against the tax reform and the CO2 tax. However, it was soon accepted by all parties and has remained an important part of Sweden's tax system, regardless ruling parties and majorities in the parliament. Now, let's move to the next picture and look at the economic impact of Sweden's CO2 tax. We have had as you see there in the graph, we have had a good economic growth, 84%. That's a pretty good performance, in spite of a couple of economic crises, including the global financial crisis in 2008 and a national financial crisis in the beginning of the 1990s. At the same time, greenhouse gas emissions have been reduced by 29%. That's a pretty good decoupling. So CO2 taxation remains a cornerstone of Sweden's climate policy and giving incentives to reduce energy consumption and to expand production of renewable energy alternatives. Today, more than we understood in the early 90s, climate transition is good for export and import competing industries. We can take the example of green steel, Sweden's main producers, the LKAB, the iron ore producer, and SSAB, which is its main steel producer. They are big exporters, and they are now moving into green steel. And we have, I think, already had the first Volvo cars produced by green steel. This is a great advantage to be a front runner. This is a booming industry, and they're investing a lot. And so I think that this is a good lesson, that if you do the right thing from the beginning, if you use pricing mechanism, you can drive a good economic development. So let's now take a look at the third picture here, the third message. That is the EU Green Deal as an ETS and CO2 tax. So I agree that the EU trading system is a great success, covering 10,500 big emitters. And it has established a CO2 price driving climate transition. Europe is ahead, and Europe will benefit from this. Now, as we heard, the Commission has proposed a reduction of new pensions in order to increase the CO2 price and the inclusion of maritime sector and new system for road traffic and heating of houses. So what is now the role for a CO2 tax when ETS will be covering new sectors? My simple view is that the CO2 tax is a necessary complement to ETS to support a higher CO2 price. We won't give up the taxation because we won't leave that field without having a pricing mechanism there. So that will continue to be a cornerstone in our system. Now, my last picture, next please, is something that I found in Financial Times the other day by Tim Harford, an author. And he wrote, I found these sentences, and I think it's very good to summarize the message. The price of everything is tied to the cost of resources required to make and deliver it. Yet, carbon emissions have not been reflected in that cost. A carbon tax changes that by making the climate impact as real a cost as anything other. It sends a signal along all those supply chains, nudging every decision towards the lower carbon alternative. A shopper may decide that a carbon tax t-shirt is too costly. But meanwhile, the textile factory is looking to save on electricity, while the electric supplier is switching to solar. Every part of the value chain becomes greener. This is, my view, a very good way of explaining what these pricing mechanisms, if you talk about CO2 taxation or ETS, they have both the same aim. This is a good way to explain. So that's all. And now we are back in the present time, and it's time for Q&A. So I'm happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Mr. Larsson, thank you for the presentation of the history of carbon taxation in Sweden. My question would be, so at the beginning, the price was quite low, now it's over 100 euros. What would be the right price for carbon and most effective price? I mean, where would this price go?
The price will always, we will need to make it higher as long as we haven't secured the 1.5 degrees goal. So therefore, there's no other way. You need all the innovation, you need all the decisions, all technologies, but without the pricing mechanism, it will not work. So therefore, use all the mechanisms you have available to get the right price.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being with us today. Our next speaker is Miss Nina Ekelund. She's a Secretary General of Haga Initiative, Sustainable Business Network in Sweden. And Nina, you will present the climate transition, why it is profitable. Kindly welcome.
Thank you. And I just wondered if you saw that was a question to Alan.
There is a question, yes.
Andre, should you take
Mr. Andrei, you can ask the question.
Yes, hello, Andrei Gnezda here from Umanotera. Thank you for the opportunity. I was just wondering, because we know that the industrial sector is hard to decarbonize, and we also know that there's quite a lot of carrots and very few sticks within this sector. And I think this is a widely shared opinion of view of many NGOs. So there's a lot of exemptions on tax reductions, on CO2 exemptions, on RES surcharge, etc., 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 along with the free allowances. So basically, how do we incentivize, by which policies then, if not proper carbon pricing, do we incentivize the industrial sector towards deep decarbonization? Ms. Gregorin did mention that the updated ETS is supposed to be a stronger driver or incentive for decarbonization, but we don't see it as such, given all the exemptions that are in place and all the free allowances.
Thank you. You are addressing Mr. Larsson for all of them.
I think it's for all the presenters. It's a more general question, but I think it's an honest one. Yeah. So thanks.
Well, I think I sent it on to someone else to answer. Perhaps Nina can do it.
And maybe we can take that discussion in the end when we have a discussion with all the companies.
Okay.
Okay, Andre?
Andre, it's okay that at the end we go through the presentations and then we open the debate. This is really important topic. Thank you for putting the question out. So Nina, you're now on the line. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna, and thank you so much for the great collaboration we have together with you, Anna, and CR. And I will give just a short talk about climate transformation that is profitable. And I will also mention the call on carbon, and then my colleague from Finland, Juni Peronen, will talk more about the climate call on carbon. So next picture.
Nina, there is a little problem, I think, with the microphone. Can you speak a little bit closer? I hope that it will be.
So I hope this is better in my new microphone. Can we take the next
Just go
picture?
on.
Does it work, Anna? Works?
Yeah, we hear something, but it's okay. Just go on.
Okay. So the Haga Initiative, it's a business network, and you can see the companies that are members here. It's well-known Swedish companies. And the Haga Initiative shows how business can contribute to the 1.5 degree target. All the companies within the network have a target with net zero until 2030, and have already had a target to 2020 with a 40% reduction. And most of the companies have succeeded that with like reducing with 80%, 70%. So the companies have already shown that it's profitable to reduce their climate impact. So next picture, please. And I just want to mention that the Paris Agreement has been very, very important to move business around the world. And we took our strategy for 1.5 degree from the Paris Agreement. And you can read about our strategy. We're working towards governments and towards business, because alone we can't succeed with net zero until 2030 if we don't have the right incentives. So next picture, please.
Nina, can I ask you to maybe remove your headset, because your sound is shifting very much. So sometimes we hear you very clearly and sometimes we can't hear you at all, unfortunately.
Oh, can you hear me now?
I hope it will stay more stable now. Please continue.
Is this better?
I think so.
Thank you, Denise, for I hope you got the introduction part, but I will continue. Anyway, we got a good decision from G20 in that perspective, that they said we should stay below 1.5 degree. And that is important, and an important signal to the now going on COP26 in Glasgow. And what we can see from all the NDCs that is handed over right now, the contributions from the country, we're moving towards a world around 2.7 degrees. And that's why we need to move faster with incentives. Next picture, please. And from a UN report, they said we need 5-fold the ambitions to stay below 1.5 degree. And we need to do it 3 times if we want to stay below 2 degrees. So we need 5-fold the ambitions to stay below 1.5 degree. Next picture, please. So we from Sweden have been asking companies for several years, every second year for 4 years, why is it profitable to work with climate? And we had asked around 300 companies, 100 companies, and most of the companies, as you can see, has answered that brand and customer loyalty is the most important for them to when they work with climate and with climate reduction. And employer branding. No person that is born in the 80s or the 90s want to work in a company that don't take sustainability and have a plan for that. So we can also see that working with that other issues like risk management, new funding, like green bonds, etc., is as well as important. Next picture, please. And we have also looked at the companies, the 100 biggest companies at the Swedish stock market. And we have asked how many companies have emissions with halving their emission every decade. And last year, it was 1 out of 3 companies, 1 out of 5 companies that halved their emission. But this year, it was 1 out of 3. So it's a very good improvement from the companies. And this is based on exponential roadmap, halving their emission every decade. And that's almost what we need to do to be climate neutral until 2050. And these also show it won't be possible for these companies if we don't have the right incentives. Next picture, please. And also on the other side of the opportunities, we have the risks. So when World Economic Forum asked 800 leaders all over the world about the 30 risks, for the last 10 years, we have seen climate being one of the top risks for the world's economy. So climate is an important issue to work with. And that's on the other side if you look at the risk perspective. Next picture. So from the Haga Initiative, we have been working with policy for 10 years and saying what we need if we are going to succeed with our climate ambitions and also contribute to the Swedish national target net zero by 2045. That's the Swedish national target, and we are 15 years ahead of them. So we have been talking about a tax shift in Swedish skatteväxling that needs higher price on carbon and lower tax on labor. That can be in our, you can say, overall strategy. But we have also, of course, been working a lot to change EU policy. And we can also say that we want to see the EU policies to align with the 1.5 degree target. The 55% is very important. We also can see that we want to have a binding carbon budget for the non-trading sector, not indicative as proposed right now. We also want to see carbon removals with long performance. We also welcome the CBAM. Next picture, please. And looking at EU ETS that we heard Paloma talk about before, we just want to say we want to align the 1.5 degree target in EU ETS. So we think the linear reduction factor should be adjusted at least 4.5%. And that is how much to reduce your emissions, say so. We want to strengthen the market stability reserve, as Paloma also mentioned. And we also want the member states to cancel the allowances when phasing out oil and coal. And that was the question we heard about before. Next picture, please. And together with our Nordic colleagues in Norway, Shift, and in CLC in Finland, we started a call in November, in spring. And last week, we sent a letter to all the heads of state, head of COP26, 196 letters, and saying that we have got support from 25% of the businesses in the world to ramp up investments, and we need a better and robust price on carbon, as also mentioned before. And my colleague, Joni Kernan, will talk more about call on carbon that we jointly been working with, and also together with CR. Next picture. So thank you for me. Over to Anna.
Thank you, Nina, for the presentation and how Sweden is introducing carbon taxing and seeing the opportunities, also some fears. And it's really great that you started this Nordic initiative, and CER is glad to be also supporting this. And we all have to work on this together, the politics, the business, individuals, companies, so everybody, also the financial sector. And yes, that's why we have this event, to find the solutions. Mr. Groschel, yeah, you have a word. And
thank you. I do apologize, but I will need to leave this meeting. I would just like to answer to the question. So free allowances are predicted to be abolished by 2045. So these free allowances will be abolished anyway by this date. The issue which is now the carbon adjustment mechanism is intended to lower the scope of free allowances because it will be in parallel when there will be growing number of these certificates issued in the frame of the carbon adjustment mechanism. At the same time, the scope of the free allowances will be lowered. The decision is not that administrative to say, because if free allowances are completely abolished over the night, this will cause a huge problem. So what we need is a clear strategy to abolish these allowances. This is what we also expect from the Commission, we as European parliamentarians, to be presented in the next few months and weeks in the frame of Fit for 55. So this is somehow expected. We will see what comes from the Commission, but this free allowances abolishment by any means, I would support it very strongly, but it cannot be done over the night. Unfortunately, it's not possible at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for supporting this initiative, and thank you for being with us today. We keep in contact. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a second. So our next presentation is from Ms. Juni Keronen, the CEO of Climate Leadership Coalition Finland, about why do we need carbon pricing. We have the video from Juni because Juni is right now very active on COP26.
Hello, I am Juni Keronen, the CEO of Climate Leadership Coalition. And I have a pleasure to introduce you the initiative called Call on Carbon. And I will use also some slides to show it. So we made the initiative for ramping up climate investments and carbon pricing. As a background, all sectors are now moving towards climate neutrality. The biggest changes started in the energy area already about 10-20 years ago. And now we see the same changes in the industry with carbon-free materials and also circularity, using all the materials so that they don't end up to a dumpster. Then we need to do also the buildings construction differently so that they are active part of the energy system and store carbon in their materials effectively. In transport, the electrification will be maybe the biggest change. And in addition, we need to have a hydrogen-based fuels and also biofuels to the extent they can be used. And then for the food area, also agriculture needs to store carbon better. And also we will have many different ways, new ways of doing food with a smaller carbon footprint. And then in the forestry area, the biomaterials, we see that the big development issue, and especially when we need to replace the old bio, the fossils coming underground, we need to take new raw materials from somewhere, and then, for example, the wood fibers would be a natural solution for that. Then the citizens' role is very important. If the citizens don't choose climate-friendly choices, it will be very difficult to get them to the market. In Finland, it has been analyzed that the citizens' role in the Finnish carbon footprint is about 2/3. And then ICT is helping us to do all these changes. And then we need to have changes also in prices, taxes, and financing to make this change happen. But this all needs a lot of investments. IEA has forecasted or informed recently that in energy area only the investment volume need to triple to get to the Paris Agreement targets. And in some areas, the speed is even bigger. The need for the speed is bigger. And IEA also estimated the investment volumes what are needed. So they say that by 2030, the annual investment volume should be increased to the level of $4 trillion, or in Europe, $4 billion annually. So how to make it happen? These investments, majority of them need to come from the private sector. So according to IEA's estimation, it's about 75%. In some areas, we have estimated that maybe even a bit more. And we know that what is the silver bullet? It is the carbon price, but we don't use it effectively. So today, only 22% of the greenhouse gases were covered by a carbon price. Revenues collected in 2020 were $53 billion. Pre-tax subsidies were $450 billion, and post-tax subsidies over 5 trillion, and the majority of these damages are caused by the health effects. So this means that we penalize the pollution by 1 monetary unit, support it by 10 units, and do not care about the damages worth of 100 units. So this is the reason why I established this call on carbon. So we aim to get large volume of visible support for carbon pricing from all over the world before COP meeting in Glasgow, and encourage governments to faster and bigger actions in this area. We launched that last spring in the Nordic level, then we had a global launch around US Climate Summit, and we also had an article in Forbes magazine on this. And then currently we have more than 100 businesses and business networks, which partners represent and gather over 60 million companies with over 25 trillion market cap and over 120 trillion assets under management in over 100 countries, call on governments to ramp up carbon pricing. And then we have also informed the COP party heads of states and governments by a personal letter in October this year. So what we are calling? The undersigned are calling to back their net zero to countries to back their net zero targets with effective, robust, reliable, and fit-for-purpose carbon pricing instruments, align the carbon pricing instruments where appropriate, and finalize the rules of international market mechanisms under Article 6. So by 29th of October, we got 136 signatories. And here you can see the largest signatories. ICC is the largest. Then we have COPA-GOGECA, the European Farmers Association, Women Business Coalition, UNPRI, Orgalim, and many others. So we wish that we will also have lots of support, and this will lead to a coalition of willing countries who want to develop carbon pricing. And then also we wish that this will be the main theme between the next COPs, the COP from Glasgow to Cairo. Thank you very much.
It was great to have Juni, at least on video, with us. He's really dedicated to accelerating ambition on reducing emissions in business, and we work together. Okay, Nina, now I hand the word to you, to the last two parts of our event. First, the short presentation of the companies, how carbon pricing supports green investments in Finland, Sweden, and Slovenia. So the positive and also the fears of the companies. Well, I can even introduce Nina, the next speaker. So the next speaker will be Mr. Alexandrup, Director, Public and Regulatory Affairs, Lettmannen, and Chair of the Swedish Bioenergy Association. Mr. Sandrup, the word is yours.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me, and good morning to you all. Very nice to be here and to listen to all those interesting presentations. As said, my name is Alexandrup. I'm Director of Public and Regulatory Affairs at Lettmannen. I'm also the chairman of the Swedish Bioenergy Association, as well as board member of the European Ethanol Producers Association, EPURE, and the World Bioenergy Association. So I'm quite involved in bioenergy, and that will be quite much about what I will speak about. Few words on Lantmännen. As Nina mentioned, we are a member of Haga, the Haga Initiative, together with other companies. Lantmännen is a farmers cooperative. We have 19,000 Swedish farmers as members or owners. We have 3 different business areas. One is agribusiness. We are selling the inputs to the farmers and we're buying their produce. We are in the food industries. And then the third one is bioenergy, which is one important sector, and not at least for the future. We think there are great possibilities to increase the business we have in the bioenergy sector. We're actually the largest bioenergy company in Sweden. We have been involved in bioenergy for around 40 years, so it has been a long time. I think the first reports we, let's say, produced internally was already in the end of the 70s. So it has been a long time for us in bioenergy. We have 3 business areas in bioenergy. It's the ethanol production. We have a biorefinery producing ethanol from residues as well as from crops, buying crops from our members, of course. We have district heating plants, around 15 such plants, and we are also a shareholder. We own 50% of the largest wood pellets company in Sweden, producing around 500,000 tons of wood pellets each and every year in Sweden, as well as with one plant in Latvia. Just to see the opportunities here, the bioenergy sector has actually indeed created business opportunities for Lantmännen as a company, but also, of course, for the farmers, both as crop producers, but also, as it is in Sweden, most of the farmers also own forest land. So they can sell their biomass from the farms or from their forests to the bioenergy sector. We have been very successful in transformation here, and I guess that is one of the reasons why Sweden and the Haga Initiative is involved here. I'll just give you a few numbers. Today, the energy use in Sweden, Mr. Larsson showed the reduction of CO2 emissions and the economic growth we have seen during the last decades. But if you look on the energy market, bioenergy in Sweden represent 38% of the total energy use. Oil is 25%, hydropower is 13%, and nuclear is 30%. So those are the 4 main energy suppliers to the Swedish energy market. Back in the 70s, before the oil crisis, we had a very, very high dependence on oil. It was about 80%. So we understood that this cannot go on. And then we had different policy measures introduced in Sweden. Today, the total renewable energy is 55% of the total energy use. And in the transport, which is maybe the toughest sector to decarbonize, we have 23% of renewable energy, and that is biofuels mainly in that sector as well. So I think it has been discussed here quite a lot about ETS. That is one part of it. If you look on the European level, you have also the effort sharing regulation. So that is all the other sectors that are outside the ETS, which is still, if we look on the numbers we saw here, 40% of the emissions are covered by ETS. So there's still 60% remaining, and you need to find some kind of measures to handle those emissions. And in that case, the CO2 tax has been in Sweden the main tool to reduce the dependence on fossil energy and to reduce the emissions. It has been, from our perspective, an excellent tool. It is a market-oriented tool which is cost-efficient, and that is very important to us. You can have also other types of measures we have had, and we still have in Sweden, investment aid, but this is only for new technologies. You should not support, let's say, mature technologies, because then you are disturbing the market too much. The CO2 tax should be the main measure. We also invest quite a lot in R&D. I think it was mentioned before. This is extremely important. We are in a very big transition of the total society, and we need new technology. But the most important, as said, has been to put a tax on CO2 emissions. If you look on what we want to see when we are designing incentives, I think I put up a number of conditions here. It should be as market oriented as possible. So you should utilize the advantages of capitalism and the free market. Also, we should not have micromanagement by the politicians. We can see some, I would say, massive failures by the Renewable Energy Directive of the EU, where you are trying to do micromanagement on a very detailed level, and that is not good. It will not bring us in the right direction. It's too slow, and it will be, in some cases, even counterproductive. We also need to have long-term predictability, both for the consumers of the energy, but also, of course, for the business. If we want to invest, as we have invested in our ethanol plant, for example, maybe 300 million euros, we need to have predictability for the years to come, not only the current year or 1 or 2 or 3 years. We are talking about decades. I also think the measures should be technology and energy source and application neutral. Coming back to micromanagement, it's important to have a technology neutral system, because then the market will solve it the best way. It must also be cost effective per ton of CO2 abatement. Sometimes when you are trying to favorize some types of applications or energy sources, you will not have the most cost efficient solution to the society. But CO2 tax on the CO2 emissions is actually offering that. And then last but not least, we must design the policies and the measures so it creates business opportunities in the countries where you are applying this policy. Because if you will just push down, and it was discussed previously, the business opportunities, and you will create no new jobs, no new business, there will be resistance in the society, and the parties that will push for this in a democracy will not survive the next election. So it's important to have this, to keep this in mind, that we also need to create jobs and business opportunity to when we're phasing out the fossil energy to start new types of businesses. Thank you. I have a lot to say, as you understand, but I think I used my 5 minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Centrup, to present your organizations. I'm sure that there are quite some questions, but I would suggest to go on with the business presentations and at the end have the questions and answer session. So our next speaker is Mr. Sasha Abbott from Clough Insulation, Managing Director, System Division and Group Marketing Director. And Sasha Abbott was actually one of the companies founders of CER. So Sasha, kindly welcome to present your point of view.
Yeah, good morning to everyone. So I'm coming from Clough Insulation, and this is the company producing insulation materials. I was just trying quickly to calculate how much of European insulation we produce, and it's probably around 10% goes to us. And it's interesting that our business, it's in principle on one side, heavy producer of CO2, because the process is to melt the stone or glass requiring a lot of energy, and this energy is not always just electricity, it's also coke in some cases. So we are on one side a big producers, say emitters of CO2. On the other side, our insulation is saving through saving of energy through the lifetime, probably the 100 times of the amount we are emitting during the production. So I can speak about two sides of this, I would say, stick. And the first one is, if you're looking now from industry point of view, of course, we know that we have to reduce the carbon dioxide and that we have to reduce the consumption of energy, but okay, we cannot go completely against the laws of the physics. So there is certain amount of energy necessary to melt the glass and stone to get the proper properties. And at the moment, the problem is that technologies are not available to be produced to do things in such a scale as we are doing today. Is not to have such a stable production, so it means developments will be necessary. On the other side, when we did all the calculations for us, it means in principle you are building again the whole factory, the whole company, because you more or less have to replace everything what you have today. All the manufacturing facilities will have to be replaced by new technology and new things. And I would say the quick calculation means for us, let's say with 20, 25 plants, it can go up to 4 to 5 billions. And if you think the company is selling $1 billion per year, you can see what kind of amount of money means this for us if you want to transfer and become completely, how to say, to go with energy consumption to minimum and to move completely to electricity and hydrogen, for example. So it's a big thing for us, and of course, if let's say the timeline to achieve this and do this it's long enough, of course, through the, I would say, upgrading cycles, we for sure will do this, and it's a, so of course the high energy prices are an additional stimulation for us on one side. On the other side, we have here the problem that, of course, somebody will have to pay this. Unfortunately, this is going to be the consumer, because there is no business who will just do things for free or for even for a loss. And on the other side, our problem is, will there be enough, I would say, green energy available, even of hydrogen or electricity, that we can still do our business? Because at the moment, when we are now hunting around and trying to make, I would say, our production as green as possible, we are just simply figuring out that we cannot replace our existing energy with a green one, even if we want to, because there is not enough things available. And if everybody will try to do the same, I think we'll get in another trouble. I touched before the other point, which is the consumers. It's unfortunately, at least that's what I see in the construction industry, and probably all of you who are trying to do any kind of construction at the moment, you feel it already on your pockets. It's all the cost increases of raw materials, energy, and at the end of the chain, and this is the consumer. And if the governments will not take this in account, then this sustainability will become an exercise where we take care about the environment. We are making it, okay, not the most attractive for the business, but for sure the people for whom the whole sustainability should be, say the whole point, will be the ones suffering. So I would say our view on this CO2 emissions exercise is like this. We support it as much as it's necessary, but we should not go look at it just as kind of one-way street, and we should be able to look it wider, so that there is, beside just the goal of reducing the CO2 and monetizing it, or I'd say creating the legislation around this, should be also business opportunities around, and that there are also people who will this or that way feel whatever kind of decisions we are going to make. That's just a little bit of, I would say, philosophical thinking about the CO2 emissions, at least, yeah, from our side. We strongly support it, but things should be balanced. Sustainability should be balanced. So the triple bottom line, profit, planet, people, that should be something what we should have in account, whatever kind of sustainability actions we are taking.
Thank you, Sasha. Thank you for sharing this point of view and actually holistic approach of sustainability, which we should not forget about. Our last speaker today is Ms. Ulf Wikström from Stockholm Exergi. I'm sorry, Nina, could you
that was
say
perfect.
Again his name?
That was perfect.
It was perfect. Yeah. Why carbon pricing drive the energy transition. So kindly welcome.
Thank you very much for letting me be here and tell you about my reflections on the development we've heard about. Stockholm Exergi was, should we say, the engineer's victory over the communication department. Exergi is a way of describing how to use the energy's values in all its levels, from the highest electricity to the lowest heat recovery. Now, my reflections are let me first tell you about a company very short. 10 terawatt hours of energy production in the greater Stockholm area. We have a turnover of 700 million euros annually. 50% owned by the city of Stockholm. 99% of our energy sources now are renewable, reduced, refuse, or energy recovery from sewage plants, waste treatment plants, etc. Our next step is to go into the art of removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere by bio-CCS. aiming to be the pilot and the biggest and the first project in Europe and also in the world doing this. And our target is by then being climate neutral or climate positive in our value chain by 2026, 25, 26. Now, as you perhaps heard of, Sweden, district heating in Sweden has been a very powerful story. The whole sector has gone from using almost exclusively fossil fuels to phasing them out totally. And the emissions have decreased by 90% or so. In Stockholm area, we can see that the carbon footprint per capita has gone down from over 3 tons per year down to below 0.5, 400 kilos per capita. So that is really an interesting story. Residents in Stockholm has then been able to reduce their carbon footprints by this. I would like to elaborate a little bit on what factors that made this possible. I think I have 5 major findings here. Firstly, we had district heating grids, and they were developed during the 70s and 80s, mainly in order to improve the air quality in cities. We had emissions of nitrogen dioxide and acid gases and particulate matter and so on. And we needed to improve the air quality, and district heating made this possible. Today, road traffic is the challenge in cities in Sweden, mainly. Secondly, we began, as Ellen Larsson told us about, very early to tax fossil fuels. And this must be something that really makes every national economic oriented person very happy. Internalizing environmental cost in the value chains will, in the end of the road, give results. And that was what happened in Sweden. In order to avoid those costs, all actors started to look for non-taxed alternatives, renewable alternatives, and so did we. It went very fast, though, thanks to the district heating systems, because there were quite few plants that needed to be modified and quite few plants that needed to be constructed to use renewables. So we could do this relatively quick in Sweden. Then came the EU ETS. In the beginning, the prices were very low. We all know the reasons behind that, but we took a bet in our company. We knew that fundamentals said that if we're going to need the carbon or the climate goals, the prices for emissions need to go up. It will happen sooner or later. We took a bet and made a huge investment program in order to be able to phase out the last fossil fuels. And luckily, we were ready. A year ago, we could shut down our last fossil CHP and replace it with renewable with Europe's and probably one of the world's biggest bio-CHP plants in Stockholm. So it was a good timing there when the prices started to raise in the ETS system. And third, we have a very strong bioeconomy that Olarik told us a little bit about. We have a strong bioeconomy based on forestry, producing, for instance, biogenic building, woody materials and pulp, raw materials for packaging, newspapers, toilet papers, and other products. And thus, we had residues, such as branches, treetops, and sawdust. It was already there. It was already in the forest, emitting its biogenic carbon that the trees once captured through photosynthesis. Now that could easily be collected and became the renewable bioenergy that replaced fossil fuels in the district heating sector. Now it's also starting to make its entrance in the transport sector in the same way. Same CO2 emissions, but now with a great benefit for society. The 4 reasons that Sweden decided to phase out landfills, a very strong program in order to stop landfilling, stop the methane leakage from it, and stop the destruction of groundwater and the waste of values in society. Recycling is growing. It started early, but it's growing strongly. But all the time we have reject coming from that. And this reject needs to be treated. I would like to make an analogy with sewage treat plants taking care of the wastewater from the urban areas. We also have solid waste treatment plants taking care of the solid waste coming out even if we try hard to avoid it, there will be some rejects. We treat it with thermal processes, incineration, with energy recovery. And that was also a way of phasing out fossil fuels, because 60% of the energy there is also renewable. And we're now struggling with getting rid of the last plastics in the waste. And that is our last, should we say, fossil struggle now to get totally absolute zero emittance. And finally, 5, the production of district heating has doubled since 1980s. And the heated area connected to district heating has gone up 5 times. This is a decoupling. Very interesting to in this context to analyze this. And this is made possibly because the efficiency has increased with approximately 60% during this period. So replacing fossils, making the use of energy more efficient, has made it possible for us to make a fantastic decoupling and being able to let Stockholm grow and still use less energy and decrease the emissions for it. Now we continue our journey towards zero emissions, as I told you, and what is less now is the plastics coming from households, from our own energy customers, if you like. And this is a new challenge because we can't just replace it. Now we are all in the same boat. We need to work with this together in the whole society, from producers, consumers, waste treatment companies, and treatment companies like ours. But the next step we want to take now is to introduce bio-CCS, carbon capture and permanent storage of bio and carbon dioxide. And now we need something new. The pricing of carbon emissions is necessary. It's basic. We need it in order to avoid and reduce emissions. But now we also need to put a value on negative emissions, on carbon sinks, national and technical. And this is a new challenge for society, and a lot of work going on now in different forums in order to establish this new market, because we all know the IPCC is very clear. Unless we can totally stop the global emissions within 10 years, this technology is unavoidable if we will have any chance to reach the 1.5 target. So we need to start up a new industry, and we need to start it now. So that is our...
wrap up.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anna, should I have one question for the business, because we just run out of time. I can't hear you, Anna. You don't.
Sorry. Yes, Nina. And we have one important question from before that Andrei Gnezda put. Maybe we answer at first that question, which was, I mean, it's open to all of you. So the hard industry, which is hard to decarbonize sector, and currently they have many carrots, so exemptions on CO2 tax, surcharges, low excise duties, sorry to read like this, along free allowances, and actually no sticks. How to incentivize decarbonization in industry, and because all of these exemptions, reductions obviously do not fit the purpose. Polona, you're already raising the hand, and Dietrich. Polona.
Yeah, thanks for giving me the floor. Maybe I can start, because I will also have to excuse myself soon, unfortunately. First, I would like to maybe just use the opportunity to say that it was really interesting discussion, and I'm happy to hear also the examples of, let's say, opportunities that the carbon pricing provides, because we often hear, especially in Brussels, about the cost of carbon pricing, but I think we heard very concrete examples of opportunities. On Mr. Gnezda's question, it very much depends who you ask, because I think if you ask the industry, they will probably have the opposite opinion, that there are too many sticks and not enough carrots. And there's an old joke in policy making that if you make everybody equally unhappy with your proposal, it's probably a good one. And we do think that actually the European sort of legislation provides for a balanced mix of both, we could say, carrots and sticks. Now, when it comes to the EU ETS and free allocation, maybe it's important to clarify that even with the free allocation, there is still the carbon price signal to reduce emissions, even if an installation gets free allocation. That is because, you know, if they get free allocation and if they reduce emissions, well, that just means that they still have more free allocation that they can either, you know, use in future years, or they can sell on the market. So the carbon price signal is still there. Now, having said that, in the past, we did have sort of situation where industry received sometimes more free allocation than they actually needed. And we tried in the sort of consecutive revisions and phases of the EU ETS since 2005 to make the free allocation on one hand more targeted, and also to sort of correspond to the actual needs of the industry, and sort of not to overcompensate. And now we can say that, especially since 2018, most of the installations, and you know, we also heard from Mr. Bavits, most of the installations, I think, are sort of net payers, even if they get free allocation. And also with the most recent revisions of the benchmarks, which are sort of the performance benchmarks on which the free allocation is based, there have been quite significant sort of strengthening of the benchmarks, or the benchmarks have been made more ambitious, reflecting the technological progress in the sector, so reducing the free allocation altogether. Having said that, we do think that there is a need for some free allocation, and that is, as mentioned before, to address the risk of carbon leakage, because I think we also can all agree that you know, we should not just have a situation where emissions sort of move from the EU, where we have a carbon price signal and therefore cost for the industry, to countries outside the EU and have emissions happen there. But I'll leave it at that, and thanks a lot for the discussion.
Thank you. Okay.
Can I have just a
very
follow-up
short
question?
Yeah. Okay, just short.
Thank you. So basically, my question then refers to the indirect cost compensation scheme, because you have these free allowances, and on top you have this indirect cost compensation scheme, where again we see that there are no meaningful strings attached to incentivize decarbonization. So okay, we have this. Let's accept that there's a risk of carbon leakage, even if perceived. How do you then incentivize decarbonization in these sectors? Because the price signal is obviously not there.
Well, maybe I would again a bit disagree, because I think you have a similar situation there. The carbon price signal is still there. Let's say if you use more electricity, you will basically, you pay a higher indirect carbon cost that is reflected in the price of electricity than if you reduce electricity consumption. Indeed, we have the indirect cost compensation. Maybe just to mention there, it actually, in the revision of the state aid guidelines for indirect compensation of last year, there are strings attached. There is an element of conditionality that basically sort of requires the installations that get this compensation to put in place the energy, at least the energy efficiency improvements coming from energy efficiency audits. And there are also other elements that ensure that the compensation is not too high. But yeah, I think I'm probably monopolizing the discussion right now.
Thank you for this answer. We will wrap up. I will kindly ask Sasha Bavits. There is one question in the chat for you, if you could meanwhile answer it. One last hand up is Hendrik Petren.
Thank you for very interesting presentations. I must especially single out Mr. Larsson's and Sandrup's great cases for the price on carbon. And I would say that all of the arguments for carbon tax hold equally well for an alternative suggestion that I would like to share with you. And it goes under various names as carbon fee and dividend, but also as climate income. And what this does is that it addresses actually all the issues that were mentioned here, and also from Mr. Bavits, how we can protect both planet and people. The idea is that the government levies a fee on, say, all raw materials that will end up as carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, most easily understood as coal, but also biomass, if that's applicable. And you levy this fee as close to the source as possible. And then you will see that the companies, as observed by Mr. Babic, they will not do anything just altruistically. They will pass on these price hikes to the next part of the value chain, and it will end up with the consumers. And so it's the consumers, the household, that would need to get the financial support from the states, the member states, or EU as a central actor. This is very. I will post a link in the chat, and I think if you look into this, that you will find it rather simple, and it's in fact it could be a major stick, so as to incentivize the energy producers to do the right thing, while being socially just and acceptable, so that we can raise the price to an effective level. Because as we have observed, we have a carbon tax in Sweden, but we still have too large.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just post in the chat. Thank you, Ms. Ulf Wilkstrom. You are leaving us. We are shortly over the time. Mr. Sandrup, you still have the handover. I think the debate would need more time, and we would continue. Just in short, one sentence. I give the word to you.
Yes, okay, sorry, yeah, well, I agree, maybe there is a lack of sticks and so on, the balance, but one thing that we didn't mention here during the discussions hardly was that actually the CO2 tax and the energy tax combined, they bring a lot of money into the government that can be used to let's say, either compensate or to finance new technology and so on. In Sweden, I think the taxes on energy, it's the energy tax and the CO2 tax is, I think, the second biggest income to the state, actually. It's roughly around 7 billion euros per year that is brought into the state budget, and that can be used to compensate either people who are suffering from what we call energy poverty, or the companies, and of course not just to pay them, but to support them when they are trying to invest in new technology, and as well as in the R&D, as I mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. This is really important aspect to take in consideration. Nina, before I finish, the last word to you.
Yes, thank you so much for all the comments and for all listeners. Due to the conversation and discussion and all the questions, Anna, I have a suggestion for you, because I love to collaborate with you. We should have another webinar. So let's start out in 2022. In January, February, with a new follow-up webinar. Is that okay with you?
That is perfect, Nina. We definitely will continue share the experiences, fears, trying to find the solutions, to send them to the politics, to the business, and yeah, we have to keep on working all together. So thank you very much to everyone. The video will be uploaded on the SARE YouTube channel. We will share the link with you, so all the presentations will be seen there. And thank you for being with us today. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Bye.